All right, let's get deeper into the display element. So we've used display as far as referring to things being either inline or block so far. So, we know that if we have some words, I've got some words in a paragraph here. If we have some words, that those words themselves are going to be located in some sort of block element. For instance, an H2 is a block element, and it automatically is going to have a space above and below it. And technically, a block element goes all the way across the page. And then we know, of course, if we have like a word that's, bold or italics, that's an inline element. It's used inside of a block element somewhere. But when we start laying out web pages and we're putting things into boxes, sometimes we want more control. All right, so what I've done here, just to show you kind of some examples, is I've created a big box. That's my red box. That's, our big div box like we'd have a lot of times. So I've got everything inside this big box, and I've got my header up on the top. But then after the header, I've got this green box. And technically this green box is actually two things. It's the aside, which is just a name I gave this one here, and then an article. Okay. And inside the article, I have some additional stuff here, but we'll turn the article off right here. Okay, so I've got my aside and I've got my article, and I've put some notes here to show you. I'm going to set it up so 20% is on the left hand side and 80% is going to be on the right hand side. Now we can do that with a couple of different things. So we could do that with display, and right now the way we've done this in the past is we floated them. And I could do that. I could say that the width is of this aside is going to be 20%, and I could float it to the left. And then I could say the article width is going to be 80%, and then I can float it to the left. And you actually float them both to the left. That just means they float up next to each other. And so if I do that, I can do that. And you can see here now, we've got this is on 20% and this is 80%. And you can't see the green part of the box anymore because I've covered it up. But we'll give this side a color, well, we'll do background color of yellow and a color of red. So you can see the difference. Okay, so this side's my 20%, this side's my 80%. But notice here's the problem is this kitty cat over here is on this one, and they're not going to be even. So the 20% side doesn't have as much stuff in it, and so it just stops. And when we do floating, that's what's going to happen. They're going to float next to each other, but one side's always going to be smaller than the other. And what you could do would be, these two are all in a green box. I could attempt to make some color changes here, but the easiest thing is going to be to change this display completely. So instead of this going to be floated to the left, I'm going to call this display table cell. And I'm going to make the other one also display, instead of float, display table cell. Now, this only works if they're inside another one and that other one is displayed as a table. So when we come in here, I've got my article and my aside, and I've already put them in a green box. Okay, and we can't see the green box because these have colors on them, but they're inside a green box. So what I'm going to do is set the green box that's holding them to be display table. So it's like the green box is a table, and these two sides are cells in the table. So now we can actually see the background color now. And notice how they stay nice and tidy. They're right next to each other. So this one is treated as the 20% side of the table, and this is treated as an 80% side of the table. And it's as if it's a one-row table, and then we've got something on the left and something on the right. It's a really neat trick, to be honest. And then the color is coming from the green box that's holding all of it. So the green box is like the table itself, and then the two sides of the table are set to table cell. And I put notes here on this to that effect. So it's a very, very cool way to be able to balance things up. All right, so let's look at this with regards to this bulleted list down here at the bottom, first and second. So bulleted lists, LIs, are typically displayed, oops, are typically displayed in block element, right? So what happens if I set the display to inline? Oops, it'd be good if I could spell today. So if I do that and we take a look at these, now the bullets are gone and they're right next to each other. And if I give them a background color, let's say of aqua, then what you're going to notice is my REPL will run. Look, I'm not even at school and my REPL's being mean. Okay, here we go. But what you're going to notice is they're not the same width. And that's because, as you know, with inline elements, it's just as long as the words are. So the word first is short, the word second is longer, so they're going to be different sizes. So what I want to introduce you to is another display element type, and it's called inline block, which means it's on the same line, but it treats it as a block element. And because it treats it as a block element, it won't look different yet, but because it treats it as a block element, I can give it a width now. So I could even say that like each of these are going to take up 25% of this area. So there's like still two more 25% to go. But see, now they're the same width. And also I can do like, say, padding. I could say I want 10 pixels of padding all the way around those. And then what's going to happen is they're going to actually start to look more like buttons. But I didn't have to make buttons. I basically just changed list items to be displayed inline block. Remember, inline's what puts them all on one line, but block is what allows us to give it a width and padding and stuff like that. So these are some really cool tricks, all talked about basically on this page, explaining the difference between inline block, and then that last one that I mentioned, the table cell. And remember, table cell is really going to help because if we float, we're going to end up with them only being as tall as their content. But if we, instead of floating them, if we use widths, and then we set the table cell display in here, and then we have to put them in something, and the parent element has to be set to just table, then you have this option. And that's pretty cool. So there is an additional thing here. It's not going to matter on this one, but you can see if you were trying to center these down like in the middle, then you could actually center on those table cell. You can actually center them vertically. That means top to bottom. So like if I wanted these to be in the middle of this box instead of up at the top of the box, you could also schedule what's called, or set what's called vertical align. And that only works in inline block, and table cell elements. You can't use it in block elements, but you can if you have this table cell. So here, see how they're all set at the very top? But if you wanted them in the middle, you would set your vertical align here to middle. It's not center, it's middle. So experiment with that a little bit so that you kind of get the gist of how this whole table cell thing works. And just remember, you have to have a parent. So you have to have a box. Think of it like an invisible box, but I like to give it a color so I can see it first. And that invisible box has to be set to table for the display. And then the two sides of the table are going to be set to table cell. So my main box set to table, and then the two side by side set to table cell, and those have the widths. So experiment with that, and experiment also, of course, with checking buttons and creating a bulleted list that is inline so it won't have any bullets, but then inline block so that you can make it look more like a button.